everyone, and welcome to another Spark Social Justice session. I'm Tom. I'm joined today by Helen Hayden from Leeds City Council to talk about her role and what we can do as a part of Leeds to combat climate change. So welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you very much. So my first kind of question to you is sort of how did you get to being an executive in Leeds City Council, and kind of what kind of things do you do as part of your job?
Thank you. Well, the first thing I had to do to become an executive member was to be elected a member of council. That I went for that. I went to be selected in 2014, the autumn of 2014, and then I stood for election first for the ward of Temple Newsome, which is where I live and was brought up, in East Leeds in 2015. So May 2015, I was elected. And then your main focus is your ward and ward issues and getting to know how to do the job of being a councillor, which is different to my previous professional job as a teacher in a high school, which is in my ward as well. Which I loved, but I wanted to become a counsellor because I wanted to influence and help shape and change things in a more holistic way than, especially the lives of children and young people, than being a teacher could afforded me. All those issues, such as wanting children to get the best grades they could have and best experience at school, were hampered if a child didn't have a decent bed to sleep in, or a home to live in, or if there was just the sheer blight and poverty, which used to be a lot better and has got progressively worse, but and they kind of, those issues blight the chances of children and young people, and I wanted to tackle those issues in a much wider context. So then nearly 6 years later, so having gained a lot of experience as a support executive member, and you're invited to do that by the leadership, and then 3.5 years, which I really enjoyed, as chair of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Board, which scrutinises, it's a cross-party board which scrutinises the NHS in Leeds and all the various guises, and adult social care, which belongs to the council, and public health as well, which is a council function as well. So it was a huge, very wide remit. I was elected to that post 4 years running. Well, actually the pandemic interrupted that and I just got given another year. So 3 years, by the Labour group of councillors, by the group of Labour councillors. So, and that gave me a huge experience in in knowing how the council functions, and all the different kind of procurement, commissioning, how services are commissioned, the different issues, and and health in particular affects everybody in the city. There's nobody that isn't affected by health, and you know, people might have been to school but not have children, so, or their children growing up, so schools are no longer of a concern. They might not drive, so roads are not, but public transport is, but health affects everybody. And then when Judith Blake, Councillor Blake, was promoted to the House of Lords, there became vacancies on, became Baroness Blake, there became vacancies on the cabinet, and that's what the exec members are, they're members of the cabinet. So I was asked by Councillor Lewis, James Lewis, who became the new leader, to take on this role, and we now call it infrastructure and climate, as a member of cabinet for infrastructure and climate. So it's kind of like the national government cabinet, but on a smaller, but no less important role for the people for the city of Leeds. So I am responsible for infrastructure, so that is the planning department, the highways and transportation department, And then the climate part is everything that's involved in our tackling the climate emergency. And we declared a climate emergency in March 2019. So I am responsible for tackling that.
Excellent. So I could be working for you under you one day, because my degree, well, the degree I'm studying is urban studies and planning. So that's very interesting.
We are desperate for the new generation of planners to come through. For various budgetary reasons and historical reasons, we lost a lot of very experienced planners in their 50s and early 60s to the Early Leavers Initiative because of the budgetary issues and pension issues just over a year ago. And but that was when they were at your stage in kind of the late 70s, early 80s, and when there was a big growth in that in local government in those type of roles. So yes, so thank you.
Yeah,
for in that degree.
So what kind of things do you do in a day? So when you're like being, an exec member on the council, but also on the local scale, what kind of like your main things that you do in a day? What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, the first thing to say is, unlike when I was teaching, there is no typical day. And that absolutely terrified me at first, because I'd miss things, because and I was terrified of missing things. And I am kind of welded to my electronic calendar, and if it's not in there, it doesn't happen, basically. And that's the main. When I was teaching, I knew in September what I'd be doing in July on any given day because of timetabling. And this is completely different. So no week is the same, but my typical kind of is kind of weekly, monthly routine is that I will, on a local level, different types of casework will come in. So somebody is struggling to get a house, so and needs different reports of bins not being collected, or things like that. And that amount of casework can range from bins not being collected to not being able to bury your mother's ashes, which was one of my first pieces of casework, or access to local parks, or the state of reporting some fly tipping, or something like that. Those things that really kind of affect people's day-to-day lives. Then there's the bigger issues of the bigger issues in our areas, such as employment, schools, education, that we get involved with crime and antisocial behaviour, and we work very closely with the police, with social services, with our cluster, education cluster, and so we will attend those community meetings. We will also hold community meetings, which has been difficult in the last 2 years. In fact, some of the last meetings I had face-to-face were those community meetings, and we're part of a community committee area. So Outer East Leeds, which goes out to Kippax, and involves 4 wards, so a tenth of the city, and tackling kind of issues and improvements to people's lives on a bigger area. And then, of course, I've got my executive role. So I will have briefings on highways and transportation. We will have consultations on, say, road changes, or and again, that can go from quite minor works to huge works like the Amley Gyratory, or taking traffic out of City Square. Then we have planning briefings. I have meetings with the planning chairs who chair the different planning boards, and I will chair those meetings. So all the issues that come up with planning, which is a huge area at the moment, and especially how all that relates to the climate emergency. So we have a climate emergency advisory committee, which I also sit on, but advises me, and that's cross-party as well. And then all the various kind of work with partners, such as the Food Network, on low carbon food, with the university, with the climate commissions, both at Yorkshire and Humber, and the Leeds Climate Commission. And then there's a West Yorkshire work, because highways and transportation, it doesn't stop at the Leeds border. We're part of a special public transport and transport authority in West Yorkshire. So I work very closely with our newly elected mayor, which has been great at bringing West Yorkshire together and seeing things over a West Yorkshire level. So I also am responsible for flooding, so which is a big area, both with the climate emergency and affecting people's lives in terms of and planning comes into this, building on floodplains and all that sort of thing. So but the flooding infrastructure that we have on the area, from Leeds City Centre right up into the Dales, which has phase 1's been completed, phase 2 is underway, planting 2 million trees. So, and I'm part of a West Yorkshire and actually Yorkshire and Humber kind of flooding board, where we look at that wider issues of flooding, and then air quality as well, and housing growth, which is a really big issue in terms of, especially in terms of affordable housing, and tackling that, and homelessness, and making sure that we have a good but green, sustainable, affordable housing supply. So I'm quite busy.
Yeah, quite a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of responsibility, definitely.
Yeah.
So what kind of things are within all of those departments? I mean, pick the highlights, obviously. What kind of things are Leeds City Council doing now to combat climate change? Like, that's a very general question, but what kind of things, maybe some like new things that people haven't heard about, or things that people really should know about? What kind of things are Leeds City Council doing right now?
Well, we're working, it's multifaceted. So if you take the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, which is chaired by my fabulous colleague, Councillor Neil Walshaw, who represents Headingley, they have 3 subgroups. So if we take those, so they have a behavioural change and transport and behavioural change. And then there is the buildings and homes and buildings, and that. And then there is the food. And that subgroup, to generalize their titles. So if we, and that's why I think when I asked, when it was coming into May, and because it had all been a bit last minute, January, February, in terms of appointing people, Councillor Lewis was, kind of shuffling the portfolios and where people, like a cabinet reshuffle really, but so I said, don't take anything off me, please. So because highways, transportation and planning are so affected, or so affect our ability to tackle the climate emergency, that I wanted to keep them all together. So he didn't take anything off me. He gave me flooding and air quality on top of that, which also fit very nicely with the climate emergency. So, and since, so it's nearly 3 years since we declared the climate emergency. And so it's multifaceted. So if I start with highways and transportation, we've got a new, and it's been widely consulted on for quite a long time. It was during the pandemic, but there was 3,000 people commented, which for highways, a consultation is quite high, because somebody like me, maybe, previous to having this job, maybe wouldn't have, even somebody as involved with me, have responded to a highways consultation. So, and there was webinars, and we use the digital infrastructure really well, actually. And so it's just been approved, and its main aim is for Leeds to be a place where you don't need a car. And a lot of people watching this will know how bad Leeds is in terms of public transport. And certain areas are okay. I'm very well served for buses because I'm on a bus route into Leeds. But if I wanted to go to, say, my friend in Lawnswood, I have to drive. I'll get 2 buses, one into town and one out. It's very, everything is centric into the Leeds. So we're working really hard with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, with the mayor, to and with road changes to give buses priority. So we're trialling at the moment in East Leeds, and it's in my area, which is coincidental. But on demand-led transport, so you can actually book it. So I booked it to go to St James's for an appointment, because although I live 10 minutes drive from there, it's very, very difficult to get a bus there, to get public transport. I don't own a car, so it gives me, and I do drive, and I can use my dad's car, or he chauffeurs me, it's great. But I am aware as a mother and working mother that it's very difficult to do those more complex journeys. So taking the kids to school and getting into work, it's really, really difficult. Homeworking does, and it makes sense. So we're really trying to tackle the public transport issue. Wasn't helped by the government pulling the rug from under us with the integrated rail programme that they announced in November, and that we weren't getting those extra lines that HS2 would have given us, so that we could have more capacity and more frequent and more trains on the existing local network, and that the Northern Powerhouse Rail was downgraded. So that hasn't helped, but we will continue to do what we can in Leeds in terms of public transport. When it comes to homes and buildings, that's a huge, transport and homes and buildings make up the majority, 70% of our carbon emissions in Leeds as a city of 800,000 people. So we've used government money to, if you're earning under 30,000, you could apply for free solar panels and or insulation. So we've been promoting that ends in March. We're decarbonising our council house stock, and making our new council houses, we're building 1,500 over 5 years, as carbon neutral as we possibly can. We also have the district heating scheme, which, coupled with retrofitting, is providing low carbon, low cost fuel, which is tackling fuel and food poverty, which at the moment is so important in 2,000 flats. It's also from March going to be heating the Civic Hall, the Civic Museum, the Town Hall, all the civic buildings in. But there's private developers coming online and using it. St James's Hospital, Quarry Hill are all signed up to it, and so they will all be, and that's powered by our black bin rubbish. So it's not going to landfill. We're not just burning it. I know some people don't like, don't like the burning of black rubbish, but it is going to provide low carbon, low cost heating for not just the council, which will help with our budgetary pressures, but for people who are in the most deprived areas as well. And I don't want to bore people too much, because I could talk about this for age, but in terms of food, that links into we're hoping that we will be able to grow food with the returning heat that goes back to the incinerator, as I still call it, the Rurth, which is on the edge of my ward, to heat greenhouses to grow food and flowers. So that's in the pipeline and maybe being developed. But also, well, the food group we've got a low carbon, and we set priorities, objectives to have no air freighted food for use in council. Schools have been working really hard. They've been great, and the school meals, we have our own in-house meal provider, which do the majority of primary schools. They've been working with primary school children over the last year to take out meat 2 days a week and teaching them about low carbon food. We will source food as much as possible from the local area. We didn't want to say Yorkshire, because actually Lancashire might be nearer than some parts of Yorkshire. So, but looking at our food miles and local producers and things like that. So we have 3 objectives. We've been looking into vertical farming, the use of the tops of buildings, for examples, and we're currently mapping our land use to see what it's best used for. We have planning permission granted to a private firm for a solar solar farm in Kippax, and there's potential for another 3. So yeah, looking at land use. So an awful lot going on that hopefully will benefit people, both in terms of the carbon reduction, but in terms of the pocket as well.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's a lot going on. Like even like in the last 5 years, I've seen quite a lot of different things happening in Leeds to kind of definitely combat climate change. So it's definitely there. It's definitely, things are definitely happening and definitely changing, which is great. My kind of final thing I wanted to ask you is, a lot of the people listening are kind of either young people, people that work with young people. Most people are in Leeds, some people aren't, of course, but and we welcome you to, and we thank you for watching. Is there any advice that you can share to them about like going about tackling climate change, whether that's in school, whether that's in colleges and things like that? And are there any opportunities that like Leeds City Council are offering for young people to get involved and have a say, that kind of thing?
Yes, particularly if you are in a school, and there's lots of opportunities for getting involved, like with the food, and thinking about what food you consume, what you buy, talking to your school leadership team in terms of their food providers, where they get their food from, through your school council, and also in terms of the decarbonisation of schools, which I didn't mention, because this year we've started the decarbonisation of 38 council buildings. Some of them are schools, leisure centres, care homes. So getting involved with those, you know, asking kind of teachers, leadership teams where they get their energy from, what scope there is for getting their energy from low carbon sources, and approaching governors, things like that. Getting involved in lobbying, I think that's a major thing that young people can do, in terms of what their MPs are doing, what the council, in what's around in their local areas. In the local areas, we have, every area has local parks. Many of them have friends of groups, or you can get involved in volunteering, planting trees. We planted 280,000 last financial year, so we'll get the figures for this year. It happens in the winter. The council are advertising for the local community for people to go and help them plant those trees, so you could actually get your hands in the soil and actually plant those trees. So looking out for those opportunities, which are on the council website, our social media pages, and with the community committee social media as well. So we do the seed collection every autumn, which, so I was lucky enough last spring to go and see a visit for the triathlon, who for every competitor athlete in the triathlon, both the para triathlon and the triathlon that the Brownlee brothers are involved in Roundy Park, a tree was planted for them. And I went to the areum and saw the trees from seeds that were collected by people in Temple Newsam. And there they were, and they were the strongest team. They knocked Meanwood out of the park, I have to say. But so yeah, in terms of seed collection, so that we don't have to import our saplings, and that reduces the disease. It also reduces cost, and you know, but we are, for the genetic reasons, so Temple Newsam trees will probably go to Meanwood and vice versa, so that we're mixing up the genetic makeup of the trees. But the most important thing is to think about your journeys, how you get to school or college. Could you cycle? Could you use public transport instead of, you know, I know it's often handier, and I'm guilty of it myself, to give my kids a lift sometimes, but think about your own kind of journeys to school. Could you walk? Possibly, if it's safe to do so. And we are working really hard to make it safer for walking and cycling. So yeah, in terms of your own And also, big thing about clothes as well. And think about where your clothes come from, maybe spending a little bit more, but if you can afford it, but so that they last longer, and that kind of not being involved in that fast fashion. I think that's something, I mean, I still love clothes, and I did when I was young. So I'm really not saying that you can't be fashionable, just being cognizant of where your clothes come from. Can you mend something? And the things with, and we do have kind of a pop-up where you can go and mend something rather than replacing it, and things like that. Libraries are a really good source of information and what is available in terms of how to get involved. But young people, we want you to get involved in kind of forging the future. So any consultation, such as highways and transport consultation, planning consultations. At the moment, we've got a local plan consultation going through, and it's all about the climate emergency and how planning, and it might sound really boring, but we're planning now. These things are going to be the buildings that you will live in and work in, and your children will go to school in over the next 30, 40, 50 years. So really get involved in the, what sounds like very dull, but really important aspects. So if there is any opportunities, and there is, have a look at how you can get involved in having your voice heard about what you want to see happen in Leeds, in terms of education, in terms of sport and leisure, you know, parks. There's lots of, and highways, and and planning. There's lots of different ways that your voice can be heard. So just get out there, because you're all dead good at using kind of the digital media, and so yeah, have your voice heard, I would say.
Thank you, Helen. That's been really great, and it's been really interesting to hear actually the insides of the council, because as a young person, like especially even myself, when I was in school, more certainly, like I didn't really know like how it's structured and how it works and things. So it's really interesting to kind of hear how it's structured and works, but also that there's so much being done for climate change. It's been it's so important in Leeds, so that's great to hear, and it's really good to know that that's happening. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for watching. If you've stayed all the way through, thank you. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.